Hey everybody, sorry about the noise. I'm in the middle of a parking lot and I've got traffic buzzing all around me, so this is a little noisy. I've got the windows open, but I figured let's try to fire off one of these videos while I'm sitting here waiting. This is about hormones, and we're going to take a look at one specific system here. We're going to talk about the human growth hormone system that is, again, part of the endocrine system. That makes sense because the endocrine system supports stuff like growth, metabolism, homeostasis, all of this kind of stuff. So this is definitely fitting and in keeping with that whole idea of balancing out growth. We want to be able to grow, and this obviously that makes sense, but we want to be able to grow and not grow uncontrollably. That's not good. So you're going to see here in this system, we're going to have some checks and balances. We're going to have the system set up where you're going to be able to release hormones and see stuff like tropic hormones. You'll see non-target hormones, and you'll see this thing called this feedback loop, a couple of them that will control this process so we don't grow uncontrollably. All right, what you're going to notice is that a lot of these systems in the endocrine system and the controlling of our different functions regarding growth, metabolism, all that kind of stuff, is that it is going to require coordination from the central nervous system. And in this case, we've got here our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland. And you'll see that these two things really do work together. Signals sent from the hypothalamus or to the anterior pituitary, or sometimes hormones produced in the hypothalamus that get sent down to the posterior pituitary. That's kind of the two pathways that we see here. In this case, we're talking about human growth hormone, which is, if I did not mention, the topic of this whole thing. We are going to start with, I'll get my pen out, signals sent from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, and it's going to send it using something called releasing hormones, and I'm going to put RH for short, just because I don't have enough space. But these are releasing hormones, and those releasing hormones are going to cause the anterior pituitary to release something called HGH. And that gets released from the anterior pituitary. Now, what does that HGH do? Well, let me tell you. Let me back out here. Conveniently enough, I've got some things set up here. You're going to see HGH directly impact tissues such as fat cells, muscle cells, the skeletal system or skeleton, bone cells, and that's going to increase or cause the growth of those different types of tissues. Makes sense because it's HGH. That also tells us something else about HGH. HGH is a non-target hormone simply because it's going after a whole bunch of tissues. Not just one type of tissue here grows. You got a whole bunch of tissues, different organs that all need to grow in order to sustain the growing body. The other thing that it's going to also stimulate is the release of growth factors. So this is HGH. So this is going to also release these things called growth factors, and I'm going to put GF for short for growth factors. GF, that's a bad looking G, but you get the idea. And growth factors similarly will also impact other tissues as well. Now we call them this generic named growth factors because the hormones that are released by the liver, these growth factors, there are very many. There are a lot of different types, and those different types of hormones will interact and stimulate growth in different types of tissues. But again, this is all stimulated through the human growth hormone, which is then stimulating the release of these growth factors, these hormones from the liver, and those go on to then also impact the growth of various tissues around the body. So what you're going to see here is we've got this really interesting sort of setup. We've got, first of all, our releasing hormone. That is a straight up tropic hormone that communicates between the pituitary that communicates between the hypothalamus and the pituitary. And then we've got this other hormone here, this human growth hormone, um, which you can consider to be really non-target because it's going after a whole bunch of tissues. And it's also playing a role of a tropic hormone, simply because it is also stimulating the release of another, actually a whole bunch of other hormones. So, and that is those growth factors that we talked about before. So I'm trying to illustrate here the use of these different terms and show you how they all sort of fit together. Okay, so what about this negative feedback loop? Because we want to control this, right? Because this looks now like we are definitely getting things growing, getting things moving, and we want to be able to stop that. So there is a negative feedback mechanism in this, and it makes use of, conveniently enough, human growth hormone, as well as growth factors, different growth factors, which will go back and interact with the different control points that we saw earlier on that started this whole process. And you can probably guess as to what that's going to be. So if we look at human growth hormone, there are two places where it will actually go back and interact with and provide negative feedback. If there is too much in the system, it's going to go back and slow down the production of HGH by inhibiting the activity of the anterior pituitary itself, but also providing negative feedback to the hypothalamus. Similarly, growth factors will also do the same thing and will also provide negative feedback to those same places, the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. There is our negative feedback system. So that is really, in a nutshell, human growth hormone and how we sort of can use that as a way to illustrate how the endocrine system works, its function, and how it regulates itself. All right, hope that helps.